Okay, you know that feeling.
Yeah.
Right? That heavy sense that you've just hit a wall.
Yeah.
Maybe a plan you were totally sure about just collapsed. Or your team's running on fumes.
Burned out. Yeah.
Or maybe there's this conflict and now everything feels kind of paralyzed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the instinct, well, it's usually panic, isn't it?
Mm.
Or trying to grab tighter control.
Or just doubling down on what's clearly not working, pushing harder.
Exactly. You just feel stuck.
And that whole cycle, that reactive leadership, it's just exhausting. It really is a trap.
It is.
Because most leaders, when they hit that wall, their first thought is, okay, what are the numbers? How do things look? Immediate visibility results.
Right. And if those numbers dip, they think, well, I've failed.
Precisely.
But the sources we're digging into today, they're fascinating. They blend strategic leadership stuff with these really powerful biblical metaphors. And they just don't see crisis as failure. Not at all.
No, quite the opposite. They argue that these moments, these crises, are actually the fastest path to breakthrough, to real clarity.
Okay, so that's our mission for this deep dive then, to unpack that framework. The one that gets you from crisis to clarity.
That's it. We're looking at this structure built around concepts like the crucible, the wilderness, the Joseph principle.
Right.
And these aren't just, abstract theological ideas. They're presented as practical tools for turning setbacks into long-term strategic advantage. It's really about recognizing that maybe the biggest stress test your organization faces, it might actually be designed to refine it, not break it.
Okay, let's get into that. Segment 1, the crux of the crisis.
Yeah.
You mentioned the mindset shift first. That seems huge.
It is.
We're always taught, overcome obstacles, push through barriers. But what if these huge barriers aren't actually obstacles? What if they're invitations to something deeper?
That shift in perception, it's everything. Yeah, the sources draw this really sharp contrast, between the common traps always chasing the quick, visible wins, the stretching resources too thin.
Which feels like standard practice sometimes.
It does. But they contrast that with their definition of success, which they often call fruitfulness.
Fruitfulness. Okay, what does that mean here?
It's not about just the size of your audience or your budget. It's about transformed lives. It's about cultivating communities that are resilient, that can weather storms. And it's about intentionally equipping the next wave of leaders so the mission outlasts you.
Okay, so if your main metric is just size or numbers, then any setback feels like an existential threat, right?
Absolutely.
But if the mission is centered on, say, that resilient community or empowered leaders, then the hiccup, well, it actually becomes material for the work itself. It's useful data.
Exactly. It's the data point you needed. And that's where this metaphor of crisis as crucible really comes into play.
The crucible.
Yeah. A crucible, it's that container built for extreme heat to purify metals.
Right.
So the sources use it as this transformational framework. Intense pressure comes, yes, but its purpose is to purify and refine both the leader and the organization.
Purify and refine.
And they're super insistent on one key principle here. In these trials, God's primary concern, or the process's primary concern, if you like, is always character. It's never about your convenience or your immediate comfort.
Okay, so the heat serves a purpose. It's definitely not arbitrary suffering.
No.
What examples do the sources use to, show this purifying process?
Well, the patterns they point to are pretty undeniable in the text they use. Take Joseph, for instance.
Okay.
Thrown in a pit, sold into slavery, unjustly imprisoned. I mean, it looks like total stagnation, derailment.
Yeah, career over.
Right. But this framework says, no, that was actually a refining chamber. They even call it a kingdom-advancing incubation. It was positioning him, preparing him for this massive future purpose. His time being stuck was absolutely critical prep work.
Wow. Okay. Incubation, not stagnation.
Exactly. Or think about the Apostle Paul's thorn in the flesh. It wasn't removed, was it?
No.
It was specifically left there, the text suggests, to force his dependence on God, to demonstrate that power, real power, is made perfect in weakness.
That's a really powerful reframe, especially, for you, the listener, if you're in one of those periods right now.
Yeah.
That stagnation, that waiting.
Yeah.
The sources call this the wilderness, and they don't treat it like a failure state at all. They see it as like a mandatory formative landscape.
Mandatory is a strong word, but yeah. The wilderness, in this view, it strips away the false securities. It forces you to actually look at the structures and maybe the character deficits that easy success often papers over.
Things you don't see when everything's going well.
Exactly. And when a leader really embraces this idea, their internal language, it just fundamentally changes. You stop saying, oh, I'm stuck.
Right.
And you start affirming, maybe just internally at first, okay, I'm being refined. Stop measuring momentum. How fast am I moving?
Yeah, the speed.
And you start measuring maturity. How deep are we growing? How strong is the foundation? That internal shift, that's the precursor. That's what gets you ready for what's next.
That shift from momentum to maturity, that actually leads us perfectly into segment 2, the Joseph principle you mentioned, and this crucial pivot away from just focusing on metrics towards anchoring an identity.
Yeah, the Joseph principle. It's basically this theological certainty built on that story, that what looks like a complete derailment, the betrayal, the pit, the prison, it can actually be God's appointed pathway, his corridor to fulfilling your ultimate calling. It's this deep recognition that sometimes providence works through those really crooked paths, not straight lines.
Okay, look, that sounds profound in principle.
Yeah.
But let's try and bring it down to the ground a bit.
Please.
How does this deep theological transformation actually look in practice? Say a leader is facing a massive budget shortfall, maybe they've been betrayed by a key partner. What's the actual application?
Well, the practical steps really start by recognizing that most crises, they're actually rooted in some kind of failure to align your strategy with your core identity, your mission. If you define your value primarily by performance metrics, by the numbers, you will eventually break when those metrics inevitably fail at some point.
Because they always fluctuate.
They always do. So the essential move is to center your leadership back on people, on enduring purpose, not just on the short-term programs or immediate results.
Okay, but when you're in that pit, right, when the betrayal or the failure is fresh and raw, it's incredibly hard to think long-term. Your gut just screams, fix this now.
Oh, absolutely. And that's precisely why the sources offer this three-step playbook for stabilizing that really difficult liminal space.
Okay, what's step 1?
Step 1, stabilize the pit. This means you have to consciously suspend quick decisions. This is often the hardest part.
Resist the urge to react immediately.
Yes. You must allow space for honest lament, for grief, for just processing what happened instead of leaping instantly into some solution that's probably just reactive anyway.
Okay, you got to process the trauma, basically, before you can even think about strategy.
Right.
Makes sense. What comes after stabilizing?
Step 2 is inventory what the pit teaches. This is where the practical audit comes in. We're talking about a really rigorous, almost dispassionate analysis. Think, what did I actually lose here, and what have I learned from that loss?
Okay.
The sources call this a skill plus soul audit.
Skill plus soul audit. Can you give an example? What does that look like?
Sure. So let's say you lost a major donor. Okay, that's the loss. But maybe you learned that your over-reliance on that single funding stream made the whole organization fragile. That's a skill lesson. Diversification is needed.
Right, a structural lesson.
Exactly. Or maybe you lost a key friendship because of a conflict. The loss is the relationship. But perhaps you learned something about your own inability to receive hard truth or give feedback well. That's a soul lesson. Humility's needed. Maybe better feedback structures are required. The point of this audit isn't blame. It's about making the hidden visible, identifying the character flaws and the system flaws that the crisis has exposed, the things that need refining.
Okay, makes sense. Stabilize, inventory. What's the third step? Interpreting it right.
That's it. Step 3. Build an interpretation team. Critically important. Don't try to read the tea leaves alone when you're in the pit.
Yeah.
Joseph, he needed to interpret dreams for others, but maybe even more, he needed people around him sometimes to validate his own sanity, his own reading of events.
Good point.
So you have to assemble trusted advisors, maybe a peer leader who gets it, a spiritual director, a mentor, people who can test your reading of the crisis.
Hold the mirror up.
Exactly. They help ensure your interpretation is leading you toward health and growth, not just further isolation or defensiveness or blame.
This whole process,
Yeah.
this disciplined, kind of slow rhythm, stabilize, inventory, interpret, it sounds like the absolute opposite of that quick wins mentality that's so common.
It is the opposite, and deliberately so. The quick wins approach, the sources argue, it just builds shallow scaffolding. It looks good fast, but it doesn't last.
Right.
This more focused, sometimes slower effort, it leads toward what the sources call the covenantal rhythm. It's about long-term formation achieved through repeated, intentional practices.
Covenantal rhythm. What kind of practices are we talking about? Not just Sunday service, I assume.
No, definitely not. It's much broader. It includes daily practices, maybe confession or reflection, weekly things like Sabbath rest, maybe intentional communal meals that build real relationship, quarterly leadership reviews that are honest and deep.
Mm-hmm.
These practices, when done consistently, they actually institutionalize movement and coherence. They build muscle memory for the organization, ensuring it's durable, resilient, able to survive the founder even.
Right. Building something that lasts beyond the initial energy. Okay, so once that foundation is set, the character is refined, the identity is clear, the mission isn't just about survival anymore, is it?
No.
It's got to lead to growth, to multiplication,
Right.
which takes us nicely into segment 3, the strategy for deployment. And the core move here, as I understand it, is shifting from dependency on one charismatic leader.
The hero.
Yeah, the hero, towards deploying many leaders.
Exactly. This is perfectly encapsulated in what the sources call the Adullam Effect.
Adullam, like the cave.
The cave of Adullam, yeah. Think about David. He's a fugitive hiding out. And who gathers around him? The Bible says the distressed, in debt, or discontented. Not exactly a polished cabinet, right?
Not the A-team initially.
Not at all. But from that group of, frankly, misfits, David forged leaders, the insight here is profound. If your entire organization, your mission, relies solely on the heroic founder, it's inherently fragile. One person gets sick, leaves, or fails, and the whole thing can crumble.
Right. That hero culture creates brittleness. So the real strategic move is replacing that owner of the mission posture
Oh, it's all on me.
with the maker of leaders posture.
Correct. And the sources even give some pretty clear metrics for diagnosing this founder dependency. They propose something called the Adullam audit.
Okay, how does that work?
Basically, you look at high-level activity, strategic planning, major financial approvals, key decisions. If more than, say, 60% of that requires the founder's personal sign-off or direct involvement, the system's considered brittle. It needs urgent decentralization.
Wow, 60%. That's a really practical, measurable symptom. So if you diagnose that, how do you actually start fixing that high dependency ratio?
Well, one key tool they suggest is instituting the 3.1 apprenticeship ratio.
3 to 1, what does that mean?
It means for every 3 hours, the primary leader invests in doing the work itself. You know, prepping the talk, running the meeting, planning the project. A trainee, an emerging leader, must get at least 1 hour of real, hands-on, relatively high-stakes leadership time related to that same task.
Okay, give me an example.
So if you, the main leader, spend 3 hours planning the quarterly strategy, your apprentice needs to spend at least 1 hour actually leading part of the strategy presentation or maybe running the after-action review of that planning session.
Ah, okay, so it forces actual delegation. Sharing the risk, sharing the responsibility.
Exactly. It pushes it down.
But, many leaders get nervous about that, giving away critical tasks. How do you manage the inherent risk involved?
That's a fair question. And the answer lies in using fail-safe experiments.
Fail-safe experiment.
Yeah. Think of them as low-cost, easily reversible pilots that you specifically authorize emerging leaders to run. You give them a small, defined micro-role, maybe a small budget, and formal commissioning for that task. But critically, you define the boundaries clearly, and you frame it as a low-stakes environment. Failure isn't just possible, it's actually expected as part of the learning. It's named upfront as the key opportunity. This accelerates their growth massively and builds systemic resilience because you're testing things safely.
Okay, learning by doing, but with safety rails. That makes sense. This whole idea of decentralized deployment, it seems directly connected to needing agility, needing innovation in a world that's constantly changing.
Absolutely.
The sources link this to the Antioch anointing, right?
They do. Antioch in the book of Acts is the model because it was the first community recorded as sending out its best talent, Paul and Barnabas, to expand the mission rather than hoarding them.
Right. They didn't keep their stars close.
Yeah. No, they set them. The key distinction here is, well, the core message, the core mission is non-negotiable. Your methods have to be agile. They must adapt. So innovation isn't just some flashy marketing technique. It becomes a spiritual exercise, flowing from discernment, community accountability, and mission clarity.
Okay, and to manage that kind of agile innovation, the framework suggests using rapid prototyping. Specifically, this idea of a minimal viable offering, or MVO.
Yes, MVO.
Okay, for the leader listening who maybe doesn't use that kind of corporate strategy language, how do we explain an MVO simply?
Just think of it like a test drive. Or maybe a pilot episode for a TV show.
Yep.
An MVO is the absolute smallest, lowest resource version of a program or initiative you can launch to test a major new idea or hypothesis. Instead of planning and building some massive year-long program that costs a fortune,
Yeah.
you build, say, a 6-week micro program that costs very little. You run it within a really strict time box, maybe 6 to 12 weeks max.
Okay, short and contained.
Very. And then crucially, you immediately follow it up with an after-action review, AAR. You capture every single scrap of learning what worked, what didn't, why. If the MVO fails, great. You learn quickly and cheaply. If it shows promise, then you iterate and maybe scale it.
Learn fast, fail cheap. Okay. And finally, this whole refined, decentralized, agile strategy. It obviously requires a completely new way to keep score, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What should that Covenant scorecard prioritize?
Yeah, it absolutely changes the scorecard. It moves away almost entirely from those superficial metrics like just raw attendance numbers or weekly cash flow. Those are lagging indicators at best.
So what does it focus on instead?
The focus shifts to 2 main areas: reproduction metrics and formation depth.
Okay, reproduction metrics.
That means tracking things like how many leaders have we actually commissioned and sent out, how many new ministries or initiatives have been reproduced by people other than the founder or the initial team. You're measuring if the system is actually copying itself effectively.
So measuring the sending capacity, not just the seeding capacity.
That's a great way to put it, exactly. And the second piece is formation depth. This tries to track the actual investment in character and maturity, things like apprenticeship hours logged, tangible evidence of transformative community care happening, adherence to those covenantal rhythms we talked about earlier.
Right.
You're tracking fidelity to the mission and actual growth in people, not just how busy the building is.
Okay, that's a profound shift in measurement.
It really is. So maybe to synthesize this whole journey for you, the listener, the sources argue that the fastest path from feeling stuck to achieving real, sustainable clarity requires these 2 non-negotiable anchors.
Okay, what are they?
First, you've got to anchor your identity and your organization's identity in enduring principles through that process of character refinement that's the crucible work.
Right, the internal work.
And second, you must embrace a disciplined strategy of multiplication and deployment. That's the Adullam and Antioch work. Always preferring the sending of your best leaders over hoarding them for your own comfort or security. Those 2 engines working together, internal refinement and external deployment, that's what creates a lasting legacy, not just a temporary success.
So the ultimate challenge the sources seem to leave us with is this then. It's no longer a question of if you'll face difficulties. That's just built into leadership, isn't it?
It's a certainty.
The real question is whether you'll allow those difficulties, those crises, to define your story as one of failure, or if you'll actually seize them as the catalysts they can be, catalysts for an unprecedented kind of breakthrough.
Yeah. And the investment you make today right now, in the midst of whatever you're facing that work of clarifying your core values, strengthening those relational bonds, intentionally pouring into the next generation, that's the single decision, really, that determines whether your work eventually fades into just a memory or whether it flourishes into a multiplying, resilient, lasting legacy.
Inventory, the pit. Build your interpretation team, and maybe start thinking about test driving your first minimal viable offering. Some real practical steps there. Thank you for diving deep with us on this.
Absolutely. It's crucial stuff.